Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome back to the Way Station. This is season 2, and I'm still your host, Rebecca Darren Ellis, nobody in particular, and also just like you. As a reminder, in every episode of the Way Station, we explore first-person stories, each told on a common theme, but from vastly diverse perspectives. We'll introduce you to everyday, real people whose lives are seemingly different than yours. Or are they? Perhaps through these stories, you may find that you and me and he and she and they and them are more alike than we're willing to admit. And now a thank you to those that make this show possible, my friends at Pioneering Collective. This podcast is powered by Pioneering Collective, an executive thought leadership firm combining personal PR, coaching, and networking to transform hard-earned wisdom into heavyweight impact. Learn more at pioneeringcollective.com. What makes a good teacher? And how do we recognize the lessons they are teaching us are valuable? I must admit, I was never one to listen to anybody, really. I wanted to dance to the beat of my own drum. And in my rebellion, I closed my ears and my heart to many teachers who saw potential and value in me that I could not see. There was the writing teacher in high school who couldn't understand why I interrupted class frequently with jokes and adversarial remarks when my writing was, as she called it, so insightful. There were the teachers in college that, to be frank, I was scared I could not perform well enough for, that I didn't even really try at all. And then there were the mentors in my 20s that tried to keep me from going down a path of self-destruction, knowing that I would be remiss not to see what they see. Gee, when I think back, I was pretty lucky, but I didn't see it in the moment. Now I think back on all the lessons I was taught and see them quite differently. They weren't people who were trying to change me into something that I'm not, which is what I thought at the time, but rather people who were attempting to nurture in me that which I was unwilling to see. A good teacher doesn't go by any prescribed lesson plan or try to make you be the way that they are. They inspire you to be the best of who you are. So what lessons were you taught that maybe at the time you didn't find of value, but now seem to be invaluable? That's what our guests are here to share with us today. I am super excited to welcome into the Way Station today Dr. Kaushal Nanavati and Jacqueline Schallis, two very real people with very real, very honest, very true stories about their own experiences with the teachers in their lives. I hope you can relate. I'm so excited to have our guest in the Way Station with me today for this very first episode of season 2. We're back, guys. So I'm super excited to introduce you all to Dr. Kaushal Nanavati and Jacqueline Shaulis, two very real people with very real, very honest, true stories about their own experiences with teachers in their lives. And I'd love to hear from you first, Kaushal. Let the audience know a little bit about you first. So Dr. Kaushal B. Nanavati is an integrative family physician, an author of the Core 4 of Wellness book series, and an entertaining motivational speaker who was born in India. He currently resides with his family in Baldwinsville, New York. And Kaushal, whenever you're ready, would love to hear your experience with the teachers in your life.
Thank you for having me, Rebecca. I really appreciate this opportunity to connect with a broader audience. And I was born in India, and when I was 7, we moved to Rochester, New York, and lived in a joint family both in India and in the United States. And for me, it was an opportunity really to have a shared living family experience. I'm an only child of my parents, but I was also the youngest of 7 growing up in the same household. And so I had this opportunity to be the eldest child, the only child, the youngest child. So you can only imagine the complexes that I might be having. You know, when you talk about teachers, first of all, I want to thank all the teachers out there because I don't always get to meet mine. And so I really appreciate the gifts they give. They don't realize the ripple of their impact over time. But that being said, you talk about teachers, and obviously the first ones we think about, many of us, are our parents. We think about our relatives. For me, my dad taught me about tradition. He taught me about Hindu philosophy. My mom taught me about commitment and compromise by her example, love and compassion. You know, when I came to Rochester and we were sitting at the dinner table, my uncle one day asked a question and I gave an answer, and he made a great point. He said, you know, I learned something today. And he taught us that you can learn from everyone at the table. So even though people have different titles and different roles, different stages of life, that doesn't mean we can't learn from those that are younger than us, those that have different experiences than us. And it's not always about age and stage in life. It's about openness to experience. My aunt, who passed away decades ago, at a young age, but she taught us about determination, resiliency, resolve, grit. She was like the glue of our joint family. And then my siblings, my older siblings, I always joke about this. They taught me what to and what not to do as well. So as they grew up, they stepped in a lot of the potholes and the landmines, as we call them. So I knew what to avoid. Growing up and kind of had a smoother path. So I always thank them for that. We joke about that a lot because they gave me a lot of great insights in life of positives and negatives. And I think that has a lot of value as well. But from day one, I tried to pay it forward. I think for me, as a younger one growing up, what I realized was I'm getting all of this support. The best thing I can do is to pay it forward. And so even when I was a kid, there was a younger kid or somebody in need, or in the classroom, teachers would have me sit with the kids that might be struggling, just because what I had learned of kindness and compassion was something that started to become a natural part of my fabric, of the way I communicated. At times I learned the lessons from those that were in distress because sometimes I didn't understand that. As a kid who did fairly well in school, I used to struggle with how people struggled until I got to my own struggles when I got to later stages in life. And then I realized it's very easy, right? It's very easy to just 1 degree of change and life is completely different. And so as I got older in high school, junior high, there was one teacher who made a great point. He was a math and computer science teacher, an ex-NFL football player who from 7th grade onwards used to call me Doc because he knew that's what I always wanted to be. And that was motivational and inspirational for me too, that he believed in an immigrant kid and achieving something that was for me up here at the time. And he once taught a great lesson to me. He said, whatever you do in life, root yourself in the fundamentals and the rest will grow. And that message, that lesson I've taken with me, throughout my life. And it actually makes me emotional to even talk about him because he has no idea the impact that he had throughout my living journey, right? So I did invite him to my wedding reception, to which he did come. My wife is from India. I got married through the traditional Indian way. And so that was a great opportunity to, pay it back and to appreciate and to respect. But I will say that throughout my life, while I've had these traditional teachers, what I really wanted to share with you guys that I was excited to come on here about was the teachers I've had that you don't think of traditionally, right? So for me, I think the greatest teachers for me, and I minored in philosophy in college, have been the Hindu Gita, the Bible, the Old Testament, the Quran, a lot of the Buddhist readings and writings, because at the end of the day, when you actually embrace the content beyond the secular aspects, there's a simple message, right? It's about understanding contentment and peace, right? What in Sanskrit they call santosha and shanti. Santosha is masculine, shanti is feminine. You go a little bit further east, you got yang and yin. Yang is masculine, yin is feminine, right? Cultures and traditions throughout time, throughout civilizations have come back to the same conclusions. And so I've used those. COO once asked me, who's your mentor? And I said, the Hindu Gita. And he looked at me, his eyes were like, what are you talking about, man? I said, well, the truth is in the great books, right? People interpret the truth, but if you want to get the truth, the fundamental, it could be in different languages, but whether we say hello in French, bonjour, or we say, hello in my language, Gujarati, kem cho, or hello in English, the point is we're saying the same thing, just coming at it with a different filter, a different scope. So that insight actually brought me through medical school, brought me through my early training. And then in 2015, January 1, I saw the movie Interstellar, a midnight show. My teenager and my brother who lives in town, my first cousin, his two boys thought, it's a space movie, we'll go see it. And we went to Interstellar, and it might be about time travel, right? But it was a deeply philosophical movie. And these kids halfway through are like, what the heck is going on? And I'm thinking, this is amazing, right? And in that movie, I don't want to give away the whole thing. Matthew McConaughey might call us up. In that movie, they sent him out. But the equation, the professor fudged it, so they couldn't get him back. And then the professor passes away, and his understudy, who's McConaughey's daughter, figures out two constants that were missing. Now, pay attention here, folks, right? The two constants, one was the effect of gravity. So you think about that, and you think about relationships, the law of attraction and repulsion. The other was love energy. And I'm thinking, okay, it's a movie, love, foo-foo stuff. But 2 months prior, I'd been to a medical conference where these scientists were talking about data, and they kept saying love is essential. And Harvard did a study on men for 75 years looking at what brings them happiness and satisfaction. And the bottom line, the author the main author was a British guy. They published a book. He said, I can summarize 75 years of data in 5 words. He said, happiness is love, full stop. And the full stop is a period in British parlance. So literally, happiness is love. So in this movie, I'm like totally blown away. I'm like, I talk about 2 words, contentment and peace, but in 1 word, it's love. So since 2015, I started talking to my patients about love. That became my great teacher of the moment until I realized it's not just love, because that can be conditional, right? If you do this, I might love you. If not, step. But what I found and realized was it's not love, it's unconditional love, right? Giving for the sake of giving without an expected outcome as your end point, and receiving unconditionally without limitation. So I'm sitting there going, oh my goodness, this is insight beyond insight. And then about 2 years ago, a bigger realization came. The human heart beats 86,400 to 144,000 times a day. And with each heartbeat, the heart sends off blood, doesn't know where it's going, doesn't know what it's going to do, doesn't care what shape, whether it's going to be received or not, but it keeps on giving unconditionally. And we use the symbol of the heart for love, literally giving love unconditionally. And when the blood comes back, it doesn't know where it's been. It doesn't care what it's done, doesn't care what shape it's in. It just opens up, embraces it, nurtures it, and then releases it again, right? If our heart can do this 100,000 plus times a day, how can we not be the embodiment of that? And so to me, that lesson is paramount to our living experience, to our relationships, to all that we embody in terms of not only philosophy, but everything that we want to espouse as community members in society, as a global body. And for me, that's been amazing. There are some other lessons from the human heart. People talk about, I don't have enough time for myself. I had a patient recently who said, I give to my children, I give to my parents, and I feel empty. And I said, it's very interesting because the human heart is a giver as well. It gives all day long, but it's figured something out. It's got these coronary arteries. So every time it beats, it feeds itself first. It takes care of itself first so it can keep giving. Sort of like the airline message, right? Put your oxygen mask on. The body is actually embodying that message, right? And showing us the way, right? The way the organs cooperate. If you think about, what's happening around the world, at the end of the day, when you eat, the gut needs more blood to digest. So what does the brain do? What does the heart do? What do the kidneys do? The liver do? They actually go into a little bit of a relaxed mode and share the flow with the gut so it can digest. And once the gut's done, the flow goes back. Shared distribution, but respect and value for all aspects, right, of the body, that every member is just as important. And at times, one may need more resources than the other, and the others are willing to share, knowing that when it's their turn, the rest are going to share with them. So when you have that information, and if you think about society, if you think about highways and byways, the body has so much to teach. Think about Atlanta, LA traffic, right? New York City at rush hour. If our body, our blood flow had that kind of a traffic jam, you'd be gone. But our body recognizes this concept of flexibility. And so the vessels expand when you need more flow, and they contract when you need less. More channels open up when you need more flow. And then they contract when you need less, right? When it's downtime. So we have so many lessons within that. Think about teachers as not just external, but the fact that you're walking around with a universe of lessons all within you at all times. All we have to do is just pause, pay attention, and then embody that message in our action. So what's fascinating is even beyond the human body, in everyday things, there are so many lessons. Our teachers can be everything and anything, right? So I took 104 days one time, and every morning I meditated, thought about who am I? And whatever thought came to mind, I really reflected on that. So one day I was a snowflake. One day I was a deep blue sea. One day I was a wolf. Water. With water, you think about it. Bruce Lee had a quote once that if you pour water into a glass, it becomes a glass. And the insight I got was the water still remains the water. It may take the shape of the glass. And water is the softest substance in the world. And yet it's strong enough to cause these tsunamis and hurricanes, etc. And there are times where we need to be as soft as water, and there are times where we need to be the tsunami, depending on what the situation is that we're facing, right? There are so many teachers. Everything is a teacher. Every emotion, anger, fear, frustration, love, lust, greed, happiness, joy, right? All of these things are teachers in many ways because they invite not only a feeling and an expression, but then if you get to the biochemical level, your cortisol goes up or down depending on your emotions, serotonin, dopamine, all of these things that actually have impact with consistent presence. they flavor the soup of our life. And so every so often, if you taste the soup of your life, and if you don't like the flavor, how are you going to change it? By adding more of what you like until that becomes a dominant flavor. And that's proactive living. So these are, so many lessons that life teaches. If we can just pause and actually pay attention, attention is a great teacher. Action is a great teacher, right? Doing changes things. Knowing is a start, but many people think knowledge is the key. It's not just the knowledge. The wisdom is knowing when to use that knowledge and to act on it.
Wow. Thank you so much, Kaushal. I feel like that went in so many different places and I want to comment on everything. So I'm just going to start reading off of the list of things that I wrote down that I'm going to think about. And I love thinking about this idea that it's so true, but your family are your first teachers and you learn by their example and how you are a teacher for your family as well, no matter what age you are, no matter how much life experience you've had. I have a 2-year-old. She's my first child. And how much I learn from her on a daily basis about my life and how I want to walk through life. Just the lack of fear and the willingness to try and be imperfect. So thank you for reminding me of that. And I also really appreciate the way that you think about all of the spiritual texts in your life and how all of the information for you has been distilled into the same content. And it reminds me of storytelling and the point of this podcast. The point of this podcast is to show people that we're more alike than we are different, right? No matter our experiences, no matter where we come from, where we're raised, where we're born, when it comes to these big human themes in life, we just have a different perspective on the same thing. When you were talking about the scriptural text, spiritual text, it made me think about storytelling and the power of storytelling as a teacher, because all those are collections of stories that we learn the moral of the story from. I also really love this idea that you brought up of unconditional love as a teacher and lessons from the heart specifically and the body. It sounds to me like you have, and given what you do, this makes sense, such a reverence for the human body and the way that it functions, and have really paid attention to how the lessons that it's taught you in your life, and not only the knowledge, like you said, like having knowledge of the body, but taking action from that knowledge, using that wisdom and the learnings that come from that. It really just sounds like everything is a teacher. And what I feel like I'm really taking away from it is this idea that knowledge isn't everything. It's the end all and be all. It's what we do with that knowledge. So thank you so much. Jacqueline, I'd love to hear from you what resonated in Kaushal's story.
Like you mentioned, there were so many juicy gems that were there. I felt like I was just sitting at the feet of a master, getting just so much information and so much I agree with. There was one point, and Rebecca, you touched on this as well, about our parents and our family being our first teachers. To be truthful, before becoming a parent, that particular point was a reason why I did not want to have children, because you are the person who is going to shape this human or these multiple humans that are going to impact friends, family, co-workers, spouses, next generation. This one person impacts so many things. It's like, if you screw it up, you're not messing up one person. You have generations that have to recover from you dropping the ball because you are the teacher. And
as if I wasn't a Peretti, Jacqueline. Now I've got that weight on me.
I still have that kind of in the back of my mind. Even now, my son's almost 13. But it's still one of those things oh gosh, okay, let me just breathe. Breathe on this, because even there's that fine line between seeing what others are doing and hearing what they're saying, and then, to your point, implementing it. You can be surrounded by people who are showing you excellent examples of what it means to live a life that's of service and of love and of gratitude and of giving back, and do the opposite. So there's that component as well. So that's something that's always been in my mind, and I've never shared that. I'm glad I had an opportunity to bring up that point. So that is one of those burdens that I keep it in mind, but to your point, that implementation is what makes the difference. If we get too fixed on the perfection side of teaching, especially as a parent, it's easy for us to then create more problems that we're trying to avoid. So that's an important issue. There was a phrasing that you said. It was flavoring the soup of your life. And if you don't like the flavor, add more of what you love to it. I will be borrowing that. I will be crediting you, but I will be borrowing that because that is such a beautiful illustration of not only for teachers and how outsiders can affect us, but how we can influence what we're learning and how we are teaching others through example. Going back to that point where we as parents are the first teachers, but also we're influencing other people around us all the time. There are people who are learning from our existence. Hopefully they're learning good lessons, but they're learning lessons one way or another. And so being able to taste that soup of life and then make those additions or subtractions so that it's just right for you, even in doing that, there is a lesson for those people that we're influencing. And there are things that we can learn as we're doing that experience, while people are watching us learn as we're doing that experience. I love that phrasing and I love the imagery of it. And there was another point, and you mentioned that your teacher was the one who told you about this. And I wrote it down. You want to root yourself in the fundamentals and the rest will grow. It's just so good. I think a number of teachers can relate to that point. And a lot of people, I considered becoming a teacher. I decided to opt out of it. Is the teaching part was great. Like the pouring into lives was great. All the rest of the stuff I didn't want to do. But that notion of being deeply rooted in the most basic things so that you can flourish, so that you can grow and develop, that's really an essential part of a lot of the work that I do. Again, it's a very beautiful illustration how essential it is for us to not just go to the big things. It's the little things, it's the mundane things that no one cares about. No one wants to do, but those are the things that then allow you to flourish in whatever aspect of your life, professionally, romantically, familially. It allows you to grow in all of these different ways, and being able to lead by example and being able to set the tone for your own life and how you want it to go, as well as how that then impacts other people around you. There were so many gems. Those were the ones that stood out the most because there was just so much goodness around teaching. And this is one of those almost, what is it, like an inception moment where we're talking about teaching and we're being taught by someone who's telling us about teaching. And so it's like all of these layers that are happening simultaneously.
It's meta. Thank you. Jacqueline, I don't know why I didn't mention that either, but about the soup. That was a really great analogy. And what it's making me think of too is like you were saying that if you don't like the soup, you keep adding a couple of other things to it. And if you keep on adding a couple of other things to the soup, you might have a totally different soup than you were planning to make. And I think that for me, one thing that I've come across when it comes to learning new things is I expect it to go a certain way and to have a certain result. And I have to let go of those two things because I might lose out on this great bouillabaisse.
And the other thing there is also, there's letting go and letting be, right? Flavor comes with time, right?
Yeah.
Things take time to cook. You have to let them percolate, right? Etc. And so we sometimes are too impatient. We might sample it too early and not really give it the time it needs. So patience is something that comes out of all of this soup of life as well.
With that soup analogy, and part of why I love it is that it's very easy for us to think about if I could go back in time, I would change, so on and so forth. That's a whole other ball of wax that we could get into. But with the soup analogy and looking at it from that framework, you recognize that you can't, if you put in too much salt, you can't take the salt out.
Right.
But you can do other things to mitigate the salt. The salt never gets replaced. The salt may be altered, but the salt also is what gives the soup its flavor from that point. And what's interesting to me is that rather than looking at this terrible thing happened, or this one time I did this one wonderful thing, I'll never get to do that again. Instead of looking at experiences from that way, looking at that layered effect, all of these things together are what make the soup, not just this one component, not just these couple of times that it was added. It's the blending of everything together over time that's what creates the soup. So that analogy, oh my gosh, you ought to write a book.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to let our listeners know that if they need the recipe for the soup, they can go to the Waystation website.
Absolutely. It's such a simple and potent illustration. It's such a beautiful way to just be, as you can imagine it. You can imagine your soup and the ways that you would add or subtract or modify or just simply enjoy it. You want them to share it with friends and family. Like, maybe you don't do soup, but you'll try it because, someone you love made it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. And thank you, Kaushal. I'd love to move over now to Jacqueline's story. First, let our listeners know a little bit about you. Jacqueline Shaulis is the New York City-based, Texas-born and raised international speaker, global best-selling author, and leading SME on getting introverted women of color seen, heard, and respected by embracing their awesome. Nice. Jacqueline, whenever you're ready, I'd love to hear your story with the teachers in your life.
Well, thanks so much. There's so many teachers, and just as Kaushal shared, there is experience that comes and learning that comes from literally everything is a lesson. But one of the teachers for me that stands out is my teacher who is a debate teacher, Penny Aguirre. Now, this woman, she met me at a debate tournament. I was on a debate team kind of as let me get out of my comfort zone. And she began hounding me for a year. Every time that I would go to a tournament competing against her team, she wanted me to come to her school and recruited me to come to her school. I would never see her in between besides these interactions. And this woman changed my life. She created the pathway for so much that I do. I can directly credit it to her hounding me and her seeing a student that was not her student, wasn't in her class, at her school, on her side of town even, and still seeing potential and saying, you know what, I want to be of service. So let me do my best to bring this student here and see how I can support and help her. So this space that she created for me to be able to speak more and to do all of these other things, it unfolded from her harassment, her loving, caring harassment. And what it really did for me and the process of her every time I would see her, always saying, you are such a great speaker. You're such a great debater. I really, really want you to be able to be at our team. We have resources. We can help you, so on and so forth. It helped me to shift how I viewed my abilities as a speaker. I knew as a child that I would be speaking on stages. Like I just knew this, like that speaking, writing, and traveling the world, I knew from kindergarten. However, how to make that happen? Question marks. So this experience with this teacher, it really shaped things and it changed how I saw myself. It was great to be on a debate team and to be able to compete and get awards. It was great for me to take steps towards this vision that I had for myself, but it's a completely different animal when some stranger comes to you repeatedly and says, I see bigger for you than you see for yourself, and I want to help you get there. That opened up a completely different path for me. I felt like I could do this. I knew eventually I would be able to do these things. But her support and really leading the way and clearing the path for me to take actual tangible steps towards these goals, that was a game changer. So, of course, she convinced me to upend my life and my family's life. This was in high school. So I had to convince my parents to change everything. They had to change their schedules between myself and my siblings who were younger than me. We had to change how our whole family operated because now I would be doing more events. I would be doing more competitions. They had to meet this strange woman who lured their child to this other school. There were all of these different pieces that affected far much more than me, but thank God that my parents trusted what I had hoped, and more importantly, they trusted in her. And so once this was officially underway and I was able to go to the school and be under her wing, she put me in opportunities that I would not have had before. Even though I was debating and I was competing, I was winning awards across the state, I never had an opportunity or even knew that I could do contests to win money for college. I had you can do that? You can speak and get money for college? Yes, you can. And so I was able to fund a good portion of my college experience because of speaking. But it was only because this teacher saw this thing in me and was willing to say, oh, I have someone who could do this. Oh, I know someone who could do that. I had a chance to teach college level education while I was still a teenager because the local community college was launching this new initiative for underrepresented students, and they needed someone to teach the college English component. And my debate teacher's like, oh, I know someone who could do that. I got to be a college instructor when I was 17 because of these opportunities. So there are so many things that she opened the pathway for. I never would have fathomed that I would be doing any of it. It wasn't even on my radar to consider. If we think about, there were things that we would consider and there were things that we would talk ourselves out of. And then there are things we just don't know. This was beyond things that I didn't know. And so the fact that this one woman really had the faith to say to a student that she didn't know, here are these possibilities, to back up her word and to really create a path for every good thing that I have in my life is just amazing. So Penny and Gary, I love you and I appreciate you.
What a magnificent force to have in your life. I love that she could just see more in you than you could see in yourself. And I really relate to that too with my teachers in my life, especially when I was younger. Like they were always seeing this potential in me that I could not see. Unfortunately, I had a rebellious spirit, so I didn't really listen to any of them. So kudos on you for being willing and open to that sort of guidance, right? Yeah, I love this last thing that you said where it was like how essentially that teachers open you up to things that you wouldn't consider, things that you maybe would have talked yourself out of, and things that you just didn't know. That last part is so important. We can't possibly know everything, especially when we're growing. And to have someone just to be like, yeah, this is something that you could do. You can teach on a college level. You can travel the country debating. That's so wonderful. I'd love to hear from Kaushal what stood out for you or what resonated in Jacqueline's story.
I think it was amazing. But as you guys were just talking, I want to go backwards. The beauty is, Jacqueline, you saw the goal. You had your goal. I'm going to be on stages. You didn't know the path. Your teacher helped to delineate a path and showed you the way, right? So, we always tell, and I always tell my students and my son as well, dream big, right? Because it's free. So dream big, but then make a detailed plan to make it happen. And the greater the clarity you have on the details, the more likely it is to be reality. So you had somebody who inspired you to the point they not only saw your potential, what they said was, this is your path. So walk the path and don't be afraid. And on your part, and I credit you for this, it requires a lot of humility, especially when we're a young person and a teenager who, on the one hand, we think we've solved all the issues of the world as a teenager. And then we realize that, somebody knows more. Somebody can show me the way. And more importantly, I'm a willing participant in this, willing to participate, to learn, and to be humble, to accept guidance, which, as Rebecca was pointing out, many of us at times have said, no, thanks. I'm good, right? It's all right. We good right now. But the thing is, we don't know what's around the corner. And people who walked around the corner are saying, hey, listen, turn right, not left. Walk around the right corner.
That was so great. Thank you both for sharing your stories. I'd love to turn to the left, to the right. I don't know, which way did we go when we last spoke? And move on to our rapid fire questions. I do want to point out that since this is the beginning of season 2, I have new rapid fire questions. So these are never been heard before, never been answered before, absolutely brand spanking new for the two of you. So the first one is going to go to Jacqueline. What's the best meal you have ever had, either because of the food itself, the company that you were with, or the experience of it?
The best meal that I had was at a vegan restaurant in New York called Dirt Candy, and they make everything out of vegetables. So I had a broccoli dog that tasted like an actual hot dog. I had a birthday cake made out of cauliflower and mushrooms. It was amazing. There was a beet cocktail. It was wonderful. Dirt Candy is my all-time favorite restaurant on the planet.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What about you, Kaushal? Best meal you've ever had, either because of the food itself, the people that you were with, or the experience of it?
There's so many, but I'll tell you guys, just yesterday, my wife and my parents are with us as well and made my favorite Indian dish. And we celebrated my 50th birthday together. And it wasn't just the food, it was the flavor and the heart that came with it, right? And I think that tops everything for me.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Okay, this is first for you, Kaushal. What's a popular opinion most people have that you don't agree with? Not an easy one.
But it's a great one. The definition of success, right? The definition of success is tied to achievement. And my feeling is that if we redefine success as the achievement of contentment and peace, we would reshape people's trajectory and living experience completely. So that's one where I often go against the grain. And it's not about the end result. It's really about redefining it to be contentment and peace.
Yeah, that would do a lot for our relationships as well. What about you, Jacqueline?
So the biggest misconception about introverts, like this idea that introverts need to be fixed or they need to change their introversion, I absolutely detest that, because your introversion isn't something you need to, like a burden. It's not a burden. This is a gift, and it's something that can be leveraged to be successful and to positively influence other people.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so next one is Jacqueline. What piece of art, a book, music, movie, etc., had a profound impact on you?
Ooh, the book Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein.
Yeah.
It's a children's book, but that book, a couple times a year, still in my blah, blah, blah years, it transformed my idea of what an author could be, and even how language can be such a profound and fun thing as opposed to a lot of the heavy materials that I would typically read.
Right. Great. What about you, Kaushal?
So I mentioned the Bhagavad Gita, as being, essential in my life. But when I was a kid, I remember the first full book that I actually ever read was, I think, in winter break in 7th grade. And we were reading Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And I actually read the whole book. And that was a very deeply meaningful, impactful book from the perspective of the main character, Pip. And the emotional stress and the depth that he experienced throughout that piece of literature. And then A Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare actually was very lighthearted, but I really enjoyed it. And it got me to the point where in college I actually took a class on Shakespeare. So I think those books actually had a great impact. But I think the philosophy and the philosophical books really mean a lot to me in terms of translating into real life, right? And the last book is The Autobiography of a Yogi by a gentleman, Paramahansa Yoganand, and just a journey of life that is experienced through that.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Kaushal, what's your favorite thing about yourself?
Right now, I'll say my bald head. No, I'm just kidding. I think, it's a great question, again, to think about. And I try to stay humble, but I do have to say, I like my personality. And this spring, my wife was away for 4 months helping my brother-in-law with their young daughter. And so one day I was standing at the kitchen counter eating, and I'm looking at the dining table going, if anybody came to my house, even a stranger, I would prepare the table, use the fine china, all the stuff. So, if they're worth the 5-star treatment, I'm worth the 5-star treatment. And so I started to realize that, I have to do better to take care of myself as well. And then I learned that even though I was at home alone, I wasn't by myself, I was with myself. So it's not about a split personality, but it's the idea that I can actually enjoy my own company, and I like me. I like my personality, I like my sense of humor. And so at the end of the day, if nobody else likes it, it's all right because I like myself. And that makes each day that much more fun.
Yeah, totally. What about you, Jacqueline? Favorite thing about yourself?
My favorite thing is my ability to laugh at just about anything. Like, I can find the humor in nearly anything.
That's a really great quality to have. Awesome quality to have. All right, last question. Jacqueline, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Ooh, it was actually right here on the show. Flavor the soup of life. That's it. Being able to look at my life as a bowl of soup and to flavor it with experiences is now the best advice I've been given.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Kaushal? What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Thank you, Jacqueline. That was, thank you for that. For me, I had gone to a board review course like about a decade ago, and the faculty member on the stage he kept saying, think about it. And after a while, I was just like, man, this guy, what's he teaching? Just think about it. But when I took my board's recertification exam, if I was in a bind, if I was in quandary, if I felt stuck, I just paused and those words came to me. Think about it. Just think about it. And throughout life, I keep realizing if I'm uncertain, I just have to think about it. And when you pause, suddenly there's clarity versus amidst the chaos, right? And so for me, those 3 words, think about it, are really, really essential to just daily life, daily function.
Yeah. And it reminds me of, think about it. You don't have to do anything just yet. Just pause. Thank you so much, Kaushal and Jacqueline. This was an awesome conversation. I loved having both of you on our premiere episode of season 2. And I'm sure everybody that listens is going to be able to relate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacqueline.
What a great conversation with Kaushal and Jackie, and such a great way to kick off this new season of The Way Station. I am going to think about soup all the time now whenever I am thinking about my experiences in life and how I sometimes have a tendency to not be patient with the lessons I am perhaps learning and with the process, and try to add in a couple of spices a little too early or make too many changes. And maybe I just need to let it go and let it be. And it is tricky because you have to know like that timing thing. When do you step back and when do you take action? I really love this idea of, in Jacqueline's story, of how she knew the goal. She knew from a young age, kindergarten, she said, of the fact that she was going to be speaking on stages. She was young, so she didn't have a plan, and how this teacher came into her life and inspired that plan and gave her the path to getting to that goal, which she very much is at now. And I really appreciated Kaushal speaking about the body being a teacher. It took me a really long time to listen to my body at all. And I was someone who used to get sick a lot when I was a kid and a younger adult. And I never really understood why that kept happening. And it wasn't until I started listening to my body and learning, hey, you're tired. Hey, you're hungry. Hey, you're anxious right now, and taking care of it or taking the self-care actions that were needed, that it began to respond in a better way. So just listening to your body and letting it show you what you need in the moment and giving it that respect and that reverence. And also thinking about how important it is to root yourself in the fundamentals. I really hope that you enjoyed this first conversation of season 2. Follow us on our socials, on Facebook as The Way Station Podcast, on Insta at The Way Station Pod, and on LinkedIn as The Way Station Podcast. And really excited for this brand new season and these brand new rapid fire questions. I hope that you like them. I think they're a blast. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week. I hope that you were able to relate. Awesome!